The Red Keep was silent for a moment too long. Joffrey Baratheon, with a cruel smirk dancing on his lips, stood up from his golden throne. The tension in the throne room could snap a sword. Cersei was watching him nervously. Tywin looked confused, and Tyrion, already bound in chains, met the boy king's eyes with the same defiance that had burned in him all his life. But in this timeline, something changes. Instead of allowing the trial to go on further, instead of giving Tyrion a chance to demand trial by combat, Joffrey does something reckless, something cruel, something that only he would think was justice. He stands up and declares, loud and cold, "Enough! The imp has mocked this court for you the last time. Execution. Now." A gasp ripples through the court. Even Cersei is momentarily stunned. Her hatred for Tyrion was deep, but even she wasn't expecting Joffrey to throw out all law and process just like that. Tyrion's face drains of color. "What?" he says, but the guards are already moving. Varys flinches. Tywin stands, shouting, "He is still entitled to—" But Joffrey cuts him off with a voice sharp as glass. "I am the king. He dies. Now." And just like that, the chain of events that shaped Westeros in the original timeline is snapped in half. Tyrion Lannister is dragged to his knees right there, in the heart of the court. And with one smooth swing of the sword by Sir Meryn Trant, who does it without hesitation, Tyrion's head is separated from his body. A silence falls so heavy it could crush bones. Blood pools on the marble floor. Shay, standing in the background, lets out a broken sob. Varys closes his eyes. Jaime is not there. He's far away from King's Landing. But in this new world, that absence will cost the Lannisters more than they could imagine, because even he knows. Joffrey has just made a move so unstable, so dangerously arrogant, that the entire kingdom could crack under its weight. The news spreads like wildfire. Tyrion Lannister executed without trial. The small council meets in emergency. Tywin tries to control the message, but the realm already knows. The king acted in rage, in madness, and worst of all, it was a Lannister that was slaughtered, not a traitor from another house, their own blood. Within days, two things start to happen. First, the morale of the Lannister alliance begins to rot. The bannermen of the West, who held their loyalty to Tywin, are shaken. Tyrion may have been despised by many, but he was still a Lannister. To kill him like a common criminal, with no honor, no justice, it smells like weakness, like division within the lion's den. Second, Dorne hears about it, and Oberyn Martell. He smiles, not the kind of smile you want to see. He sees an opportunity. A Lannister house at war with itself? Joffrey, unchecked. The moment to strike revenge for Elia Martell draws near. But that's not all. Back in the capital, Sansa Stark, who had begun to trust Tyrion slightly in the original timeline, now watches his execution in horror. She's powerless, trapped, and terrified. The man who treated her with decency, the only one who hadn't abused her, is now lying dead on the floor. And something snaps inside her too. In this timeline, Sansa doesn't flee with Dantos immediately. She's watched too much death. She begins to understand something Tyrion once told her. You must play the game better than anyone else. She starts planning her escape, but not just to run. She wants revenge. Quiet, patient, deadly. After the execution, Tywin calls a private meeting with Joffrey. He demands answers. What you've done is not only disgraceful, it's idiotic. But Joffrey's arrogance is beyond control. I'm the king, he says, and kings don't answer to old tired men. That's the moment Tywin realizes. He can no longer control his grandson. The lion has raised a wild dog, and worse, there are whispers in the court. Some say Joffrey is mad, like the mad king before him. The comparison spreads in hushed tones across Westeros. Suddenly, Joffrey isn't just hated, he's feared, and that makes him unpredictable. Meanwhile, across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen receives the news with interest. A brutal king, hated by his own family? A realm ruled by chaos? She smiles. Westeros is bleeding itself dry. The perfect time for a Targaryen return. And at the Wall, Jon Snow hears about the execution of Tyrion through Sam's Raven Scrolls. He remembers Tyrion's words, his kindness, the books he gifted, and his blood runs cold. Even on the Wall, he knows. If Joffrey can kill Tyrion like that, there's no telling what the Iron Throne might become. Jon begins to suspect the real enemy might not just be beyond the Wall, it might be the monster on the throne. Back in King's Landing, Joffrey walks the halls with a smile. Cersei tries to keep her son in check, but she sees something she never saw before. He's not just cruel now. He's drunk on power, and as Tyrion's headless body is burned in the night, a storm is building over the Red Keep. This is not just a death. This is the beginning of a civil war within the Lions, and the Game of Thrones has changed forever. The days that followed Tyrion's execution felt cursed. The throne room, once alive with politics and whispered betrayals, now felt haunted. Servants moved with their heads down. Lords spoke in murmurs. And Joffrey? He walked with a proud strut, as if beheading his uncle was a sign of strength. But not everyone saw it that way. Varys was the first to feel the shift. He watched how the nobles avoided looking at the Iron Throne for too long, how even the Lannister guards looked uneasy. The small council was cracking. Grand Maester Pycelle barely spoke anymore, and Lord Baelish had vanished, already sensing the winds changing. In private chambers, Tywin Lannister stood alone, staring at the flames in his hearth. Tyrion's death had cost him more than a son. It cost him control. Joffrey had humiliated the Lannister name by turning justice into a public spectacle. And even more dangerous, he'd done it impulsively, without counsel, without warning. Cersei tried to defend her son at first. He only did what he believed was right, she said, voice trembling with forced calm. But Tywin wasn't fooled. He did it to prove he could, he muttered, more to himself than her. He did it to spit in my face. That night, Tywin summoned Jaime back to King's Landing with an urgent raven. He needed his son now, not for war, but for control. The Lannister legacy was slipping, and across the sea, chaos was brewing. Dorne, Oberyn Martell stood in his private courtyard, reading the raven from King's Landing. Tyrion Lannister was dead, executed by the king himself. The mountain still breathed, and justice had not been served. But now the Lannisters were tearing at each other, and Oberyn smelled blood. He began sending secret messages to the free cities. Gold flowed south, and whispers followed. Oberyn didn't just want revenge now. He wanted opportunity. If the Lannisters fell, Dorne would rise. Meanwhile, Sansa Stark was changing. The girl who once dreamed of songs and gallant knights had vanished. In her place was someone colder, more watchful. She replayed Tyrion's execution in her mind over and over again, the way his eyes had searched the room, not for mercy, but for logic, for justice, and found none. That was when Sansa began to write letters in secret. She made contact with anyone who still remained loyal to the North. She was done waiting to be rescued. She was ready to become the architect of her own freedom. At the same time, in the Vale, Lady Lysa Arryn received a message carried by a well-paid courier. It spoke of a king gone mad, of a realm divided, and a young girl of Stark blood still trapped in the lion's den. Pater Baelish read the letter beside her and smiled. "Chaos," he whispered, "exactly what I need." While the South tangled. In its own web of betrayal, trouble was also rising in the Riverlands. The Freys heard the news of Tyrion's death and grew nervous. Their alliance with the Lannisters was built on promises made by Tywin, not Joffrey. And with Joffrey killing his own uncle, What loyalty would he show to the Freys when the time came? Rose Bolton, colder and smarter, watched the situation unfold with interest. With Tyrion dead and Tywin weakened, there was a vacuum forming. He began plotting quietly, even considering a deeper betrayal. If he could play both sides just right, perhaps House Bolton could rise even higher than the Freys, but the biggest shift was still to come. When Jaime returned to King's Landing and heard of Tyrion's fate, something inside him died. The brother he'd protected, the one person who had never judged him for being the Kingslayer, was gone, and not just killed, executed like a dog in front of a cheering crowd, by their own blood. Jaime stormed into the Red Keep and demanded an audience with Joffrey. The guards hesitated, but the Kingslayer wasn't a man you refused. Inside the throne room, Jaime found Joffrey alone, playing with his crossbow. "I should kill you where you stand," Jaime said, his voice low and cold. Joffrey looked up, grinning. "Are you upset about the imp? He was a traitor." Jaime stepped closer, and the tension in the room cracked like dry wood. "He was your uncle, my brother, and you murdered him to feed your ego." For a moment, it looked like Jaime might strike him. And Joffrey, perhaps for the first time in his life, felt something close to fear. Not from the threat of death, but from the realization that even lions have limits. Jaime turned and walked away, but not before saying, "You're not a king, you're a ticking bomb." Outside the hall, he met with Varys in secret. "If we don't act soon," Jaime said, "he'll burn the realm down with him." Varys nodded. "And who will stop him?" Jaime didn't answer, but in that silence a plan began to take shape. One that might end with a new king, or no king at all, and far to the north, Jon Snow looked out beyond the wall, unaware that the madness down south would soon come for him too. The next few weeks in King's Landing turned darker than anyone imagined. Joffrey, emboldened by the silence of those around him, began ruling with unchecked cruelty. He no longer sought advice from his council. He didn't care for laws, traditions, or diplomacy. What he cared about was fear. And now he believed he had mastered it. He replaced commanders in the city watch with boys loyal only to him, men who didn't blink at orders to beat a merchant in the streets or drag a noblewoman through the mud for a whisper of disrespect. Torture became common, executions were frequent, and the Iron Throne, once feared as a symbol of power, now looked like a cursed seat held by a mad boy king. Cersei watched in silence, her heart splitting. She loved her son, yes, but the monster he was becoming reminded her of King Aerys. The way he laughed when people screamed, the way he enjoyed humiliating others. She started to wonder whether she had given birth to a king or to a nightmare. Tywin, humiliated in the eyes of his bannermen, kept a hard face, but his grip on politics was slipping. Allies he had once ruled with iron control now sent messages of concern and distance. The Lannister gold didn't shine like it used to, not when madness poisoned the Red Keep. Across the city, whispers returned to Varys's little birds. The word was out. King's Landing was unstable. The capital had no honor, no safety, just the whims of a young tyrant. But behind the scenes, something else was brewing. Jaime had not forgotten what Joffrey did, and, more than that, he couldn't forgive himself. He had failed to protect his brother, failed to speak when it mattered. Now he spent every night haunted by Tyrion's eyes, the confusion, the betrayal, the silence before the blade fell. Varys approached him again. "We have a problem," the spider whispered, "but perhaps we also have a solution." Jaime was no fool. "You want to kill him?" Varys didn't smile. "I want to save the realm." They both knew what had to be done, but regicide was no small crime, especially for a man who already carried the title, Kingslayer. Killing one mad king was forgivable, even legendary. But two? Still, Jaime agreed. A plan was formed. Quiet, careful, and clean. The realm couldn't afford another public disaster. Joffrey had to die in such a way that it looked like the gods had taken him, like justice from above, not below. While they plotted, Sansa finally made her move. Using the chaos in the Red Keep, she tricked her way out of Maegor's holdfast. With the help of a clever maid and an old knight who still remembered the honor of the North, she slipped out in the dead of night and vanished into the countryside. Her destination was uncertain, but her heart burned with one goal: make it back to her family and make the Lannisters pay. News of her escape broke the next morning. Joffrey lost his mind. He ordered all gates sealed. Innocents were beaten. Half the serving staff in the castle were tortured for answers. The knight who helped her escape was flayed and displayed at the city walls for days. And then Joffrey made his worst decision yet. He declared war on the Vale. He blamed House Arryn for harboring Sansa, claimed the Vale had betrayed the crown by assisting a traitor's escape. It didn't matter that there was no proof. He wanted blood, and he wanted a distraction from the fire eating away inside his own kingdom. The lords of the Vale, always quiet, always cautious, now saw the truth. The boy on the throne wasn't a king. He was a rabid dog, and rabid dogs only. Knew one ending. Petter Baelish, ever the puppet master, stepped in quietly. "I can give you a king who's not mad," he told them. "But first, we must let this one fall." War drums began to sound. In the north, Jon Snow received a raven from Sam. The message was coded, but its meaning was clear. Tyrion was dead, Joffrey was out of control, and Westeros was burning from within. Jon felt the chill deeper than the snow beneath his boots. The enemy wasn't just the White Walkers. The South was about to erupt in war again. He couldn't act now, but he knew. The wall wouldn't hold forever, and the South needed to be saved from itself before it was too late. Back in King's Landing, Jaime stood by the throne, watching his nephew rant and rave. Joffrey barked orders like a wild dog. He screamed at lords, slapped servants, and even threatened his own mother in front of the court. Jaime's hand fell to the pommel of his sword. The time was coming, and as he met Cersei's eyes across the room, even she gave the smallest of nods. Perhaps it was time to repeat history. Perhaps it was time to kill another king. The plan was simple. On paper, Joffrey would die quietly in his chambers. No drama, no blood in the throne room, just a peaceful end, as if the gods had taken back their mistake. Varys arranged the logistics. A rare poison slipped into the king's favorite wine, imported from across the narrow sea. It would act fast, silent, and leave no trace, just a still body in a warm bed. But there was nothing simple about killing a king, especially not one as paranoid and volatile as Joffrey. Jaime took on the hardest role. He would be the one to deliver the wine, not as a servant, not as a stranger, but as an uncle coming to make peace. The Kingslayer would bow before the boy king, offer a drink in apology, and let fate do the rest. The night of the act, King's Landing, was unusually calm. No riots, no shouting from the dungeons. Just a heavy silence. Jaime stood outside Joffrey's private chambers holding the wine in a polished golden flask. His heart thundered in his chest. This wasn't like the Mad King. That had been war. This was murder. Inside the room, Joffrey lounged with his boots off, crossbow beside him as always. When he saw Jaime, he raised an eyebrow. "What do you want?" the boy spat, swirling a cup of wine already in hand. Jaime entered slowly. "To make peace." Joffrey smirked, mocking. "Too late for that. You couldn't even save your brother." Jaime ignored the jab. "You're king now, and the realm needs peace, even from me." He poured the wine carefully, the flask steady, despite the storm in his chest. Joffrey took the goblet, studied it, then looked up with suspicion. "You first." Jaime hesitated, but only for a second. He took a separate goblet from the table and drank from it. The boy was arrogant, but not stupid. Satisfied, Joffrey took a long drink. The silence that followed was suffocating. Jaime watched every twitch of his nephew's face, every blink, every heartbeat. And then, nothing. Joffrey leaned back, yawning. "Tell the whore queen I'll see her in the morning." Jaime left without a word, but an hour passed, then 2, then 4, and Joffrey didn't die. The poison failed. Somehow, either by bad timing, bad mixing, or sheer rotten luck, the king lived. And when he woke the next morning, something was different. He knew. He didn't have proof, but he felt it in his bones. The way Jaime looked at him. The way Varys had gone quiet. The way his wine had tasted off. Someone tried to kill him. And now, Joffrey wasn't just cruel, he was paranoid. The city saw the change overnight. He doubled the guard in, his chambers, tortured his tasters, had his own council members whipped for disloyalty. And when he confronted Jaime in the courtyard with wild, glowing eyes, it was clear the boy was past the edge. "You tried to kill me," he said coldly. Jaime said nothing. "You failed." Joffrey snapped his fingers. Sir Meryn stepped forward. Jaime was surrounded, but instead of ordering his arrest, Joffrey whispered, "From now on, I want eyes on him, day and night. If he breathes wrong, I want to know." Jaime returned to the White Tower that night, shaken. He wasn't dead, but he was no longer trusted. The walls were closing in. He knew he had to move fast, or not at all. And worse, someone had betrayed the plan. Someone had told the king. Maybe it was one of Varys's birds. Maybe Cersei. Maybe Littlefinger. But whoever it was, the window had closed. In the chaos, Sansa reached the fingers and finally found herself in the Vale, face to face with Peter Baelish. He welcomed her like a daughter, but Sansa had changed. She wasn't. The girl who once trusted pretty words and polished smiles. She knew Peter was dangerous, but for now, she needed him. She fed his ego, played the role of the grateful girl, all while watching, learning, and above them all, the lords of the Vale. Debated war, Joffrey had declared them traitors. Their raven scrolls had gone unanswered. And then came news that chilled even the most neutral lords. The king had begun burning traitors alive, publicly, in the streets. The Mad King had returned. Only this time, his name was Joffrey. Back in Da di Sitiard Dorn, Oberyn Martell read the ravens from the capital with a smirk that never left his lips. "They'll destroy themselves," he said, "and when they do, we'll pick through the ashes." But someone else was watching too. Across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen received a ship from Lys with the latest stories of Westeros. A mad king, a fallen Lannister, a realm turning on itself. And her dragons were, growing stronger by the day. "Let them burn," she whispered to herself, "and I'll rise from the smoke." The stage was now fully set. A mad king in the capital, a traitor uncle surrounded by spies, a girl becoming a queen in the Vale, and fire everywhere. Joffrey's survival wasn't just a missed chance, it was the beginning of Westeros's true collapse. King's Landing had turned into a prison with a golden gate. Behind the shining walls and marble floors, fear was spreading like rot under the skin. The people in the streets whispered of a curse. The nobles in their halls no longer plotted, they prayed, because now it wasn't just about survival, it was about escaping the wrath of a boy who believed himself untouchable. Joffrey wasn't sleeping well. He was having nightmares. Some said he'd wake screaming, clawing at the air. Others whispered that he spoke Tyrion's name in his sleep. A guilt no one expected was eating at him. But instead of softening him, it twisted him even more. He became obsessed with loyalty. Not just obedience, but complete, worshipful loyalty. He demanded lords kneel longer, that his name be spoken louder, and anyone who dared speak Tyrion's name, whether in praise or insult, was punished. Tyrion had become a ghost in the Red Keep. A ghost Joffrey couldn't kill. He started having statues made of himself, ordered a massive portrait in the throne room, replacing Robert's. It showed him stepping on a wolf, a dragon, and a lion all at once. He believed it was a sign of dominance, but to those who saw it, it was a threat. Even Cersei couldn't control him now. She begged him in private, "Please, Joffrey, the lords are scared. You need to stop." But Joffrey didn't listen. If they're scared, then they'll obey. Fear is the only crown that fits. And then he made the worst decision of all. He declared House Stark extinct. He sent out letters demanding that any person bearing the name Stark, or suspected of harboring Stark blood, be hunted. Not just traitors, children, maids, even bastards. The order shocked the realm, and in Winterfell, word reached Roose Bolton. Even he, cold and ruthless as he was, realized this was beyond reason. Joffrey had gone from king to butcher. Bolton began sending secret letters to Riverrun, to Dorne, even to the Reach. He knew what others were thinking but wouldn't say yet. Joffrey Baratheon had to die. Meanwhile, Jaime had vanished. He left the Red Keep in the night, leaving behind only a single letter: "I will not serve a mad king twice." He traveled west to Casterly Rock to rally what little remained of the Lannister strength. But even there, things were falling apart. Tyrion's death had broken the family. Tywin was bedridden, weakened by shame and age. The once mighty House of Gold was starting to crumble from within. And far away, across the sea, Daenerys prepared to sail. She had heard enough. The Mad King's legacy wasn't over. It had returned in the form of a child pretending to be a god. Westeros was weak, divided, and bleeding. It was time. She ordered her fleet to be prepared. "Not for war," she said, "for liberation. In the Vale, Sansa had been growing into something sharper, more calculating. Petyr Baelish believed he was shaping her into his queen, his tool. But Sansa wasn't following anymore. She was leading. Quietly, carefully, she began gathering the loyalty of the lesser lords, one by one. When she stood in front of the council, she no longer looked like a girl. She looked like a Stark. "The South is broken," she told them, "but the North remembers." And with that, the Vale pledged itself, not to Baelish, not to the Iron Throne, but to her, Sansa Stark of Winterfell. And so the pieces began to move. In the east, a queen with dragons. In the north, a daughter reclaiming her name. In the west, a kingslayer sharpening his sword. In the south, a serpent waiting for the perfect strike, and in the center of it all, Joffrey, crowned in madness, sharpening the world's hatred into something worse than war. He believed he had won. That he had. Destroyed every threat to his throne. But he didn't realize he'd just woken them all. The realm wasn't afraid of him anymore. It was preparing to fight. The wind that howled across Westeros wasn't the cold from the north. It was the gathering storm of rebellion. And this time, it wasn't one house rising against the throne. It was everyone. Joffrey sat on the Iron Throne, but it no longer commanded awe. Even the gold cloaks hesitated to meet his eye. The nobles who still remained in King's Landing were either cowards, opportunists, or spies, and all of them knew the truth. The boy king was not going to last. He ordered feasts no one attended, trials no one believed, and executions that only made the people angrier. His paranoia now ruled his every hour. He had food tasters for each meal, guards posted in his bedchamber, and ravens intercepted and burned before they could be read. He trusted no one, not even his mother. Cersei tried to hold on, but it was too late. Her son had become a monster she could no longer cradle or command. She watched him now with fear more than pride, knowing the people would tear him apart the moment he showed weakness. And that moment was coming. From the north, Sansa began her march. With her banner, white direwolf on a field of snow, she rode, down from the Vale, flanked by knights who believed not in politics but in honor. She had no army the size of Tywin's, no dragons like Daenerys, but she had something else. A cause. And the North remembered. The small folk who saw her rise called her the Wolf Queen, a girl who survived the lion's den and came back to claim, her name with fire in her eyes. Lords who had once bent the knee to the Lannisters now burned their oaths and turned to her. Sansa Stark had become a symbol, and symbols are more dangerous than swords. In the west, Jaime returned with what forces he could gather, less than he hoped, but enough to make a move. His father was dead now, gone quietly in the night. No funeral, no ceremony, just silence. Tywin Lannister, the Lion of the Rock, had died ashamed, and Jaime knew why. The legacy of House Lannister had been shattered the day Joffrey beheaded Tyrion. Jaime had nothing left to protect. No father, no brother, no honor, only the memory of who he once was, and one last oath to fulfill. Kill the king who never should have worn the crown. He rode with red banners torn in half, a signal to every house watching. The lions no longer followed the throne. From Dorne, Oberyn's daughters moved quietly, striking where it hurt. Poisoned wine in the court, slain envoys in the riverlands. They didn't come as an army. They came as a shadow, reminding the realm that vengeance wears silk, smiles, and a dagger beneath the dress. And from across the narrow sea, Daenerys finally set sail. Her dragons flew over her fleet, casting burning shadows across the waves. She no longer spoke of peace, not after hearing what Joffrey had done, not after hearing how he killed Tyrion, the man who once offered her an alliance, who respected her mind and believed in her cause. Now she spoke only of justice and fire. When the war finally reached King's Landing, it didn't come as a siege, it came as collapse. The people opened the gates to the rebels. They were done bleeding for a mad boy. Jaime entered the city not as a traitor, but as a liberator. And Sansa, now robed in gray and white, entered beside him. Cersei tried to flee but was captured before she reached the port. For the first time in her life, her beauty didn't save her. She was thrown into the black cells to wait for a trial. She would not survive. And Joffrey? He didn't fight. He didn't run. He stayed in the throne room, waiting, crossbow in hand, eyes wide, hands trembling. When Jaime entered, sword drawn, Joffrey looked at him not with hatred, but with betrayal. "You, too?" he whispered. Jaime stepped closer. "You murdered my brother. You murdered this realm." "I'm your king." Jaime didn't flinch. "You were never a king, just a scared little boy playing with knives." The final moments weren't filled with screaming. Joffrey raised his crossbow, but his hands shook too much to aim. Jaime struck him down with one clean blow, and just like that, the reign of the last Baratheon ended. Not with wildfire, not with glory, but with a whisper and a broken crown rolling across the stone floor. In the days that followed, the city began to breathe again. The Iron Throne stood empty for the first time in decades. Daenerys arrived days later. Some expected her to claim it. Others feared she'd burn the city to ash. But when she saw Sansa already leading, Jaime keeping order, and the people united, not under fear, but hope, she did something no one expected. She offered peace. The Dragon Queen and the Wolf Queen stood side by side, and the people saw something new. Not conquest, but balance. In this world, this twisted echo of the story we knew, Tyrion's death didn't just break the Lannisters, it broke the wheel, and from its shattered pieces a new Westeros was born. Not perfect, not peaceful, but free of a Mad King's grip, and that, at last, was a kind of justice.